Embattled music mogul Sean Combs' mother is defending her son. She's calling the charges of trafficking and racketeering a public lynching and a pain too unbearable to put into words.
October 3rd, 2025. The courtroom doors closed, and when they opened again, Janice Combs couldn't stand on her own. Cameras captured everything. The gasp, the stumble, security guards rushing to catch her before she hit the floor. Her son, Sean "Diddy" Combs, had just been sentenced to 4 years and 2 months behind bars for prostitution-related charges. And the woman who raised him looked like she'd been punched in the chest by reality itself. Within minutes, the footage was everywhere. Twitter exploded. Instagram Reels went viral. TikTok creators started stitching the moment with their own commentary. Headlines screamed variations of the same question. Did Janice Combs really not see this coming? Or was this the performance of a lifetime from a woman who'd spent decades perfecting the art of looking the other way? Because here's the thing about Janice. She's not just some grieving mother caught in the crossfire of her son's mistakes.
Hip-hop mogul and rapper Sean "Diddy" Combs was sentenced Friday to more than 4 years in prison. Combs was convicted in July of flying people around the country.
According to people who've known the family for years, she's been right there the entire time. Front row at the parties, present for the empire building, smiling through the whispers that something darker was happening behind the velvet ropes of the bad boy machine. So when she collapsed in that courtroom, half the internet saw a mother's heartbreak. The other half saw something else entirely. They saw a woman who finally ran out of places to hide. The divide got ugly fast. Some people posted prayer hands and dove emojis, writing things like, "No mother should have to watch this," and "She did her best." Others weren't buying it. They started pulling receipts. Old photos of Janice draped in diamonds at Diddy's legendary parties.
Janice Combs has often been seen by his side at glamorous red carpet events. She's also seen in this video at his infamous white party in the Hamptons.
Clips of her defending him in interviews even when the allegations started piling up. Comments flooded in saying she knew exactly what kind of empire her son was running, and that crocodile tears in a courtroom don't wash away decades of silence. But before we talk about the woman in the courtroom, we need to talk about the woman before the cameras. Because Janice Combs didn't just raise a music mogul. According to people who were there, she raised him in chaos that looked a lot like the empire he'd eventually built. But before the courtroom drama, there was a different kind of party, and it happened when Diddy was just a kid. January 2025. Peacock drops a documentary called Diddy: The Making of a Bad Boy.
Sean "Diddy" Combs is getting support from his kids. During the rapper's October 3rd sentencing hearing, several of Combs' children took the stand to advocate for their dad, who is facing years in jail following his July conviction on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution.
It's supposed to trace his rise from Harlem to hip-hop royalty, but what actually broke the internet was a completely different story. A story about his childhood, about his mother, about the parties that allegedly happened under her roof when Sean Combs was barely old enough to understand what he was seeing. Tim Patterson, a childhood friend of Diddy and a hip-hop producer himself, went on camera and said something that made everyone stop scrolling. He claimed that Janice Combs used to throw wild parties back in the day. Not birthday parties, not family cookouts, wild parties. The kind where drugs were out in the open, where alcohol flowed freely, where people from the Harlem streets would show up and the night would spiral into something no child should witness. Patterson didn't sugarcoat it. He said Diddy was exposed to all types of alcohol, marijuana smoke everywhere.
How is your dad today? How is your dad feeling? How's your father? Have you spoken to your dad? Have you spoken to your dad today? Have you spoken to your dad?
Drug addicts wandering through the house, pushers conducting business in the living room. He said it wouldn't be unusual for a young Diddy to accidentally walk into a bedroom and find a couple half naked, lost in their own world. Patterson described it as desensitizing. He said they were fed this lifestyle so young that it became normal. Saturday nights weren't for rest. They were for survival training. Another friend, DJ Easy Lee Davis, said he never personally attended Janice's alleged parties, but he'd heard the rumors. everyone had. The talk around Mount Vernon was that Janice Combs knew how to throw down, and that her spot was where people went when they wanted to forget the rules for a night.
It is heartbreaking to see my son judged not for the truth, but for a narrative created out of lies, she says in a just-released statement that also asks people to give him a chance to prove his innocence.
But here's where it gets complicated. Patterson also said he believes Diddy's behavior as an adult traces back to those early years. He said, "I've always been asked the question, why? I don't know the answer to why, but I truly believe it goes back to childhood." So, was Janice a neglectful mother? Or was she a woman doing what she thought she had to do to survive in a world that had already taken everything from her? Because to understand why Janice might have thrown those parties, you have to understand the man she lost. The man who set the entire trajectory of this family's story in motion. To understand Janice, you have to understand the man she lost and the streets that took him. Melvin Combs, Diddy's father. A name that doesn't get said much in the official bad boy narrative, but a name that colors everything. Because Melvin wasn't just a dad who died too soon. He was allegedly deep in the Harlem underworld during one of its most dangerous eras, the early 1970s, the height of the heroin trade.
How is your father feeling today?
They walked into the federal courthouse in Manhattan, hand in hand, in a gesture of solidarity. Diddy's 85-year-old mom, Janice Combs, arrived separately.
The whole entire family will be here today. Yeah.
When names like Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes carried weight that could crush entire city blocks. Reports claim Melvin Combs worked alongside Frank Lucas, the kingpin whose life later became the movie American Gangster. That's the level we're talking about. Organized crime, big money, bigger risks. Melvin moved in circles where loyalty was currency and betrayal was fatal. And in 1972, when Sean Combs was only 2 years old, Melvin was found shot to death in his car. No conviction, no justice, just another cold case in a city that had too many to count. Janice was left to pick up the pieces. A young widow with a toddler son and a past she couldn't erase. She moved the family to Mount Vernon, just outside the Bronx, trying to put distance between her son and the streets that swallowed his father. She worked, she modeled, she hustled small gigs and did whatever it took to keep the lights on and food on the table. By all accounts, she promised herself that Sean would never follow in Melvin's footsteps.
His ex-girlfriend, Cassie, in 2016. My son may not have been entirely truthful about certain things, such as denying he has ever gotten violent with an ex-girlfriend when the hotel surveillance showed otherwise.
That he'd stay clean, stay focused, stay alive. But here's the irony that cuts deep. The very traits that Melvin embodied, the charm, the control, the ruthless ambition, the ability to command a room and make people believe in your vision, even when it's built on sand. Those same traits showed up in Sean, and Janice recognized them. People who knew the family back then said she was both protective and pragmatic. She didn't run from the streets. She'd already lost a husband to them. She understood their power. She respected their rules. And when Diddy's career exploded in the early 90s, when Bad Boy Entertainment became an empire, Janice allegedly saw echoes of Melvin everywhere. The entourage, the coded loyalty, the way her son moved through rooms like he owned the oxygen. It looked familiar. It looked like Melvin, with a record deal and a better PR team. One old rumor from Harlem, never verified but repeated enough to stick, claims Janice used to say, "Sean's got his father's fire, but my faith will keep him clean." It sounds noble, it sounds like a mother's prayer, but looking back now, it reads more like prophecy. Because somewhere between Melvin's ambition and Janice's discipline, a dynasty was born that never learned the difference between power and danger. And when people ask if Janice knew what was really happening behind the velvet ropes of those legendary bad boy parties, maybe the better question is whether she could even tell the difference. Her whole life had already been a study in survival, and in that house, survival was never clean. And this is where the story takes a turn. Because survival doesn't just shape how you live, it shapes what you're willing to ignore. Janice said she wanted to keep her son away from that life.
She has seen stills from an alleged tape that she says shows Sean Combs having with a very famous star. How famous is this star in this alleged video?
I would venture to say way more famous. I think there are more people who know who that person is.
But the photos tell a different story. Flip through any archive of Bad Boy's golden era and you'll see her. Janice Combs, arm in arm with her son, at album release parties, award shows, exclusive galas, smiling for the flashbulbs, dripping in designer everything, living the life that Sean's empire built.
And look, there's nothing wrong with a mother celebrating her son's success. But when that success starts getting whispered about in darker tones, when rumors begin circulating about what really happens after the public leaves, when people start coming forward with allegations that paint a picture of control, manipulation, and abuse, the question becomes, how close can you be to the fire without smelling the smoke? Because Janice wasn't just present, she was embedded. She attended the parties that later became infamous. She was photographed at events where, according to multiple sources, boundaries were crossed and power was weaponized. Some insiders have alleged that Janice even warned Diddy years ago about certain people in his circle, people she thought were bad influences or legal liabilities. But if she did warn him, he clearly didn't listen, and she kept showing up anyway. Others claim she was shielded from the darker side entirely, that Diddy kept his mother in a bubble of luxury while the real chaos stayed underground, that she lived in comfort, accepted the gifts, enjoyed the status, but genuinely had no idea what the empire was built on. But here's where that story falls apart. You can't be that close to someone for that long, attend that many events, be part of that many family meetings and strategy sessions, and somehow miss all the red flags. You just can't. There's also the lifestyle itself, the private jets, the multiple homes, the wardrobe that costs more than most people's mortgages. Janice enjoyed all of it. And again, that's not a crime, but it does raise the question of complicity. If you benefit from an empire, do you have a responsibility to ask where the power comes from? Or is willful ignorance its own form of participation? The internet started calling it the Kris Jenner effect. The idea that some celebrity mothers are so deeply intertwined with their children's brands that they stop being parents and start being business partners. They manage the image. They control the narrative. They show up when it's glamorous and disappear when it's messy. And when everything falls apart, they claim they had no idea. They play the heartbroken mother card while the receipts pile up showing they were in the room when decisions were made. Now, there's no confirmed evidence tying Janice to anything illegal. She's never been charged, never been implicated in the actual crimes her son is accused of. But it's the pattern that has people talking. How many mothers of powerful men have stood by in public, smiled through whispers in private, and then acted shocked when the truth finally comes out? The question isn't what she did, it's what she ignored. And in the court of public opinion, that's just as damning. And if you think that sounds like Hollywood folklore, wait until you hear how the narrative shifted overnight. The morning after that courtroom collapse, the PR engine started humming like a well-rehearsed choir. Statements dropped, exclusive family updates leaked to friendly outlets, concern flooded every major entertainment news feed. It was textbook crisis management, and it was fast. One family representative told TMZ that Janice was recovering at home and deeply appreciative of the prayers and support. Another outlet quoted a close family friend saying she'd been under enormous emotional strain for months and that the sentencing was simply too much for her heart to handle. You know the playbook. Heavy on sympathy, light on accountability. Make people feel guilty for asking questions. But the streets weren't buying it. Allegedly, people close to the bad boy inner circle started whispering a different version of events. They claimed the meltdown wasn't just shock, it was fear. One entertainment blogger who claimed to have sources inside the legal team wrote that Janice had been briefed days before the sentencing, that she already knew how bad the verdict could be. That her reaction in the courtroom was less about surprise and more about the reality finally becoming public. Another rumor, unconfirmed but widely circulated, suggested that Janice had been pressing the legal team for weeks to do whatever it took to shield the family name. That her priority wasn't just her son's freedom, but the legacy, the brand, the Combs dynasty that she'd helped build and didn't want to see crumble in one courtroom hearing. Again, none of that's verified, but in stories like this, perception becomes the headline, and the perception was messy. Meanwhile, mainstream outlets were running a completely different narrative. They framed Janice as a heartbroken matriarch, a mother watching her only son face consequences she never imagined. Soft lighting, emotional music, the whole package. But smaller blogs and independent podcasters were running a counter-narrative. They pulled old photos of Janice at 90s bad boy parties, smiling next to her son while champagne bottles popped and the room buzzed with excess. They pointed out that this woman had been there for all the champagne years. So why were people acting like she didn't see the storm forming? PR analysts started breaking down the strategy in real time. They noted how every official statement carefully kept Janice one step removed from the mess. She was always referred to as Diddy's mother or a family member present in court, but never as Janice Combs, public figure. That's image distancing 101. If you keep someone generic, they can't be held to anything specific. It's crisis manual basics. And here's the wildest part. It worked. Within 48 hours, comment sections flipped from critique to compassion. Fans started posting prayer hands, doves, and messages like praying for Mama Combs and no mother deserves this pain. The same people who'd been calling her complicit 2 days earlier were now defending her like she was their own mom. That's the genius of emotional PR. Make people feel guilty for wanting accountability, and suddenly, accountability becomes the villain. Still, behind all the compassion posts and sympathy threads, the question lingered like smoke that won't clear. If Janice really had no idea what her son was involved in, why was she allegedly present for so many meetings, milestones, and moments tied to the same empire now under federal investigation? Was her silence maternal protection, or was it professional alignment? Nobody's confirming, and her legal team definitely isn't denying. So officially, Janice Combs is healing. Unofficially, the streets are whispering that healing might come a lot easier when you helped build the wound in the first place. And before we wrap, there's one final detail that changes how you see this entire story. September 2024, before the guilty verdict, before the sentencing, before the courtroom collapse went viral, Janice Combs released a statement through her attorney that made everyone pick a side. She called the allegations against her son a public lynching. Those were her exact words. She said it was heartbreaking to watch him be judged not for the truth, but for a narrative created out of lies. She compared the media coverage and legal proceedings to witnessing her son be destroyed before he even had a chance to prove his innocence. The reaction was instant and polarizing. Some people applauded her for standing by her son. They saw a mother refusing to abandon her child in his darkest hour, doing what mothers are supposed to do, believe in their kids even when the world turns against them. Others saw it as tone-deaf and offensive, using the language of racial injustice and historical violence to defend a man accused of exploiting and abusing multiple people felt to many like a weaponization of real trauma to dodge accountability. Black Twitter split down the middle. Some users posted that Janice had every right to defend her son, and that the media does have a history of tearing down successful black men before all the facts are in. Others fired back, saying that using lynching in this context disrespects actual victims of racial violence, and erases the voices of the people accusing Diddy of harm. The conversation got heated, it got personal, and it put Janice Combs at the center of a cultural debate bait she probably didn't expect. But here's what the statement actually revealed. It showed that Janice wasn't just passively standing by her son, she was actively shaping the narrative. She was using her voice, her platform, and her proximity to him to influence public perception. And that's not the behavior of someone who's been kept in the dark. That's the behavior of someone who's been in the war room, someone who knows the stakes, someone who's protecting not just a son, but a legacy. The statement also revealed something deeper. It revealed how Janice sees herself in this story, not as a bystander, not as someone on the outside looking in, but as someone whose name, reputation, and life are inseparable from her son's. When she said watching him be judged was a pain too unbearable to put into words, she wasn't just talking about motherly love, she was talking about identity. Because for decades, Janice Combs has been defined by being Diddy's mom. That's her currency, that's her access, that's her legacy. And if he falls, so does the version of herself she's spent 30 years building. So when people ask if Janice knew what was happening, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question is whether she could afford not to know.
Because ignorance only works if you're willing to lose everything when the truth comes out. And Janice Combs never struck anyone as the type to lose quietly. Because when the curtain finally falls on the bad boy era, when the last appeal is denied and the last headline fades, it won't just be Sean Combs' name echoing through the ruins. It'll be hers too, whispered in the pauses between news cycles, debated in comment sections that never close. A reminder that even love, even loyalty, even a mother's devotion can't wash blood out of a legacy. And sometimes, the people who survive the longest are the ones who learned early that survival means never admitting what you knew. So if you've made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Is Janice Combs a grieving mother who deserves compassion? Or is she part of the story we've been too afraid to fully examine? Hit that like button if this video made you rethink what you thought you knew, and subscribe because we're not done digging into the stories behind the headlines. The stories that make you uncomfortable. The stories that don't have easy answers. Because the truth is rarely clean. And legacy is never just about one person. It's about everyone who stayed silent while the empire was being built. See you in the next one.